My good friend Clay and I have spent many a late night meeting tossing ideas back and forth, putting together a loose series of connections we have chosen to call Clay Theory. Clay Theory is no one claim, it is no one narrative, it is no one interpretation. What you're looking at is the Clay Theory iceberg. On the surface is the canon Clay Theory, that which underlies every assertion we will make, that which, if removed, renders the theory no longer Clay Theory. Below that is the speculative Clay Theory, that which is more nebulous but, in our view, still represents reasonable conclusions to draw from the connections that we have made. Below that is the crack Clay Theory, that which we find interesting, but that which may not have much evidence, or which may be contradicted by other sources, but that which could still be worth chewing on or experimenting with. This video is going to be split up into 3 parts, each exploring a different layer of Clay Theory. Consider this a box of building blocks, a do-it-yourself kit, in order to construct an interpretation that makes sense to you. If you want to throw out canon Clay Theory, this may not be the video for you, but anything else can be reasonably removed, replaced, or reinterpreted in a way that doesn't damage the structural integrity of the theory itself. We implore you to draw your own conclusions, construct your own story, and would take pride in you doing so. As with my previous video, the theory that you're about to hear was originally generated by Clay, and through several meetings and yet more 2 AM text conversations, we've built on top of it until it's in the state you're viewing now. It was originally derived from Clay's interpretation of the Weird Route lake scene, trying to determine where Chris and Noelle could have gone, and how this could tie into the nebulous connections between worlds, between the light world and the dark world, between the world of Deltarune and the world of Undertale. And we've come up with some connections that you may find very, very interesting. With that out of the way, onwards and upwards. Entry number 17. Dark, darker, yet darker. The darkness keeps growing, the shadows cutting deeper. Photon readings negative. This next experiment seems very, very interesting. What do you two think? What do you two think? A line which has puzzled theorists since the launch of Undertale. A variety of theories have been proposed. Oh, it's Sans and Papyrus, it's Sant and Alphys, it's Asgore and Toriel, it's Kara and Asriel. It's an exercise in creative writing. Any combination of 2 people alive contemporaneously with Gaster are equally plausible. And while the lore of Deltarune has given more meaning to much of this sequence, it's now undeniable that Gaster is gazing upon a dark fountain, for example, we still have no clarification on whom the 2 are. But when Clay was revisiting entry number 17 in the aftermath of chapter 5, a light bulb went off. Because, consider what is depicted in the Weird Route of chapter 5. Chris and Noelle going deep, deeper, yet deeper into the lake, at which point their fates are unknown. But given the various peculiarities associated with this lake, the mysterious song and the mysterious disappearances, it's likely not as simple as them having drowned and sank to the bottom. And given the additional parallels between the bread given to Chris and Noelle prior to them entering the lake, and the bread given to the protagonist and mother to allow them to glitch out of bounds, a theory has been proposed that Chris and Noelle broke the bounds of this world and vanished into whatever lay beyond. And this scene reeks of Gaster. There's an odor more pungent than any sequence in the entire game where he's not directly talking to you. Access to the lake was previously blocked by a Gaster follower. The song that's playing is entitled Happy Town, which was previously evoked in the same sound test menu featuring Gaster's theme. The distorted noise playing during the submersion itself displays a picture of a lake in a spectrogram when sped up by. What else? 666%. A Gaster number if there ever was one. Noelle takes particular note to call Chris interesting, a word that, when emphasized, is often used to invoke Gaster. And for the particularly brain-rotted among you, the deeper you go into the lake, the greener the water gets. Water and darkness additionally have thematic and mechanical parallels in Deltarune. The windows into the dark world are called fountains. The texture that the dark fountains consist of, as well as the prophecy panel and the background where we meet Gaster, was found to be an image of water. Realce sings of a heart being an arc shining the way through the waves. It's not difficult to imagine that greater association with water translates to greater association with darkness, and a complete immersion in water could be indicative of a complete immersion in darkness. And the man who is darkness incarnate, whose fingerprints are all over the prophecy, who speaks to us during that sequence where all we can see is water? Gaster. The most foundational tenet of Clay Theory is that, in entry number 17, Gaster is speaking to Chris and Noelle. They are the 2. When Chris and Noelle disappeared into that lake, they slipped the surly bonds of Earth and touched the face of God. They potentially ended up physically in the true lab of Undertale, where they would be greeted by the good doctor himself. The true lab would have been serving as Gaster's base of operations during his lifetime. From that fact, we derive yet more evidence for clay theory. It has been the prevailing assumption for a good long while that we are connected to Deltarune via a computer interface hosted by Gaster, evidenced by the initial survey program which we used to interface with Deltarune, final naming conventions, and so much more. If the True Lab was Gaster's base of operations, then it's possible the True Lab was where Gaster hosted, ran, and observed the Deltarune interface. Exploring the lab, do we find evidence of that? Perhaps we do. Check out this room. What we see here is a CRT television and a collection of VHS tapes, and the Chapter 5 Weird Route concluded with something fascinating. A fade to a CRT television screen and the words, "Insert Chapter 7, Side B," which is a clear allusion to cassette tapes. In this scene, we draw back from the game and view the device which the Deltarune interface is being hosted on, and it's a CRT television running on VHS. Exactly what we see in this room in the True Lab that Gaster was purported to keep all of his secrets in. We don't know what future chapters of Deltarune have in store for us, but we may have a guess. Reverse Undertale theory has been popular for a while, purporting that each chapter of Deltarune reflects a section of Undertale. The once great land ruled by a king whom you fight at the end? That's Chapter 1 and New Home. The neon space of advanced technology and cybernetic threats? That's Chapter 2 and Core. The section dominated by rough and hot landscapes, and a game show host occupying you with various minigames, including cooking and music ones? That's Chapter 3 and Hotland. The melancholy, quiet place lit by lanterns where you meet Gerson? That's Chapter 4 and Waterfall. Chapter 5 seems to buck this trend. The pattern would say that Snowden would be next, but Chapter 5 isn't necessarily analogous to Snowden in any obvious way. But presume, for a moment, that the chapters do reflect Undertale locations, but they're not necessarily going in order, and that Chapter 5 represents the ruins and not Snowden. Chapter 5 is a visual reflection of Chapter 1, just as the ruins is a visual reflection of New Home. It was the ruins where you first encountered Flowey. It was the ruins where all of the humans fell. And given how involved Noelle is due to be in Chapter 6, to the extent of blanketing Castletown in Christmas trees and snow, the Dark World potentially being in her house, in the hospital, somewhere otherwise awash with Christmas iconography, Chapter 6 is our best contender for Snowden. What's left for Chapter 7? What's left in Undertale? The True Lab. Perhaps, no matter what, we'll end up there in Deltarune, in Chapter 7, the one not captured by the prophecy or by Lord of the Hammer, the one consisting of Toby Fox's most abstract ideas, the one depicting that which he saw in his dream, that where all of the iconography that's been built up for a decade comes to a head. We'll go to the True Lab and meet Gaster, the man who has haunted the narrative and meta-narrative for as long. Chris and Noelle? They just found a way to get there a little early, while carrying the bread from Sans, bread which notably left crumbs for him to follow, and if he followed them into the lake, into Undertale, to meet Gaster, do we now finally, after all these years, have a mechanical explanation for how Sans ended up in Undertale, and for his plethora of Gaster connections? Maybe. Maybe not. But let's look into those Gaster connections a little more anyways. The DT extraction machine. I've been around since the beginning. I remember the original Undertale theories. I was the first. I have seen everything. I remember Undertale fans discussing this machine since the release of the game. Few conclusions were ever drawn about it. It's nebulous, mysterious, and has a presence far outweighing its actual utility in the game. The presumption has always been that this was the machine Alphys used to extract the determination from the human souls. Seems a little large for that though, doesn't it? And how Alphys describes the extraction process is bizarre. Using the blueprints, I've extracted it from the human souls. A plausible explanation for that is that she built the DT extractor, but that's not specified. And if she did build it, it didn't seem like she built it from blueprints she wrote. It sounds more like she discovered blueprints already written, and did whatever she needed to do based on somebody else's design. The only other significant set of blueprints in Undertale are the ones in Sans' lab. These blueprints are described as being written in unreadable symbols, or perhaps just nebulous handwriting. a callback to the man who writes his entry logs in Wingdings, both unreadable to most, and handwriting in the literal sense, writing with hands, is apparent. There's an undeniable connection between Gaster and the DT extractor. If he didn't build it, he at least likely conceptualized its existence and left Alphys all the tools she needed to do so. But this isn't the only connection between Gaster and the DT extractor. Sans' trademark Gaster blasters bear a particular, and from the mouth of Toby Fox, intentional resemblance to the DT extractor. From the mouth of Toby Fox in the sense that both are evoking imagery of the same thing, Omega Flowey. Toby wanted Omega Flowey's presence to be felt even when he wasn't present, hence the iconography being visible in a variety of different places. But that iconography is Gaster iconography. The DT extractor would have been proposed and built before Flowey ever came into existence, and the only other thing with this iconography has Gaster's name on it. Note, too, another major component of Omega Flowey's design, a CRT television, potentially evoking yet another item in that very True Lab. A CRT television which displays a photorealistic human face, which has gone completely unexplained for a decade. But that face does possess the black and white color scheme frequently associated with Gaster and everything he touches, and is in actuality the face of Toby Fox. And Gaster, the game master of the Deltarune interface, has been argued to be a metatextual analog to Toby Fox, a reflection of the role of game developer as gods over their respective universes. So, that settles it. The DT extractor, the Gaster blasters, Omega Flowey, all drawing from the same well, a well intrinsically linked to Gaster. What does this have to do with Deltarune? Well, I forgot something. That's Gift Rot, a one-off enemy encountered in Snowden. And look at that face. That is an extremely clear invocation of the DT extractor Omega Flowey iconography. This is random. The DT extractor, Omega Flowey, and Sans' attacks belong to what are among the most climactic scenes of their respective routes, and this is just an easily forgettable enemy. What's the connection between Gaster, Sans, Flowey, and some random Christmas-themed reindeer? Oh, God. This very particular shape that gets constantly evoked throughout Undertale, it's a deer skull. What could have happened to endear Gaster to this particular shape so much? Perhaps the source of it was Noelle Holiday, or heck, maybe her sister, if she ended up here before Noelle did. Still, Clay and I find it possible that Noelle Holiday ended up in close and meaningful contact with W.D. Gaster, and it was the lake's submersion that potentially facilitated this contact, facilitated the deer imagery all over Undertale. But what about Chris? Is there any hint of Chris in the True Lab? The Red Soul in the True Lab's generator. Like I said, I'm an Undertale veteran. I remember the discourse around this soul. The question was as follows: is that Kara's soul or not? The community never found it broadly possible. We don't know where Kara's soul ended up, but the main theory was that Asgore buried it with his child. Alternatively, the soul could have just shattered when Asriel died, given that he had fused his soul in Kara's at the moment of their death. But either way, the idea that Asgore would be willing to sacrifice his beloved child's soul for a gray machine buried deeper than deep, but not be willing to use it to bring freedom to his people, is emotionally unthinkable. This isn't Kara's soul. The only other red soul that we know of in Undertale and Deltarune's canon, other than Frisk's I suppose, is Chris's red soul. It's not difficult to imagine that this is where it eventually ended up. The prophecy mentions the angel being banished and meeting with its desire. Given the persistent angel imagery associated with the soul, given how Gaster is aware of how much we long to see and meet him, perhaps this prophecy segment refers to the soul being excised from Chris and being put in the company of the man we've fiend over for 11 years, for many of us, a good portion of our lives. After all, while Ralsei says that we will save the world, the prophecy actually says that the heroes will save the worlds, plural. The word worlds, in plural, is mentioned in the prophecy a few times actually, representing the bulk of times it's said in the entire game. The light and dark worlds, maybe. Or does it mean the worlds of Deltarune and of Undertale? Timeline problems are raised by the idea of the Red Soul potentially powering the True Lab when it was in the True Lab where the connection formed that gave Chris the Red Soul. Clay theory never purported to work perfectly or answer every question, but this feels meaningful. This feels significant. Chris and Noel may have left a profound and transformative impact on the true lab, on Undertale. But that still raises the question, what happened after Chris and Noel got down here? What was the ultimate conclusion of their meeting with Gaster? What were the exact circumstances being described in entry number 17? You know, the blueprints describing potentially the DT extractor, they were found in Sans' lab, which contains a plethora of different items of Deltarune memorabilia, the punch card containing the 3 smiling faces which date back to the festival, the police badge which could have potentially belonged to Papyrus. What relevance do these blueprints have to Deltarune? If they were for the DT extractor, what relevance could the DT extractor have to Deltarune? And you know, Alphys made a big deal out of the fact that she coined the phrase determination. That phrase did not exist before she came around. Gaster would not have known the phrase determination. If he designed the DT extractor, he didn't design it to extract determination. Indeed, the DT extractor is never once called the determination extractor. Indeed, the initials DT are never used elsewhere in Undertale to refer to determination. If Gaster didn't design this machine to extract determination, and if DT doesn't stand for determination, what could it stand for? Alright. Stick with me. I hate this theory too. You can click off if you want, but it has become a popular theory in the aftermath of Chapter 5 that Chris and Noel fused and became the Knight. I'm not here to argue the merits of that theory, but I would like you to consider how it could relate to Clay theory were it to be true. It would give an explanation for the Knight's Gaster hands for one thing. It would provide another connection to the true lab where amalgamations similar to the Knight took place, and it would answer a question otherwise difficult to reconcile. What would a hypothetical amalgamite want? The Knight has attempted to kidnap 2 people, Toriel and Asgore. What do Toriel and Asgore have in common? Well, plenty. They're boss monsters, of course. But beyond that, what would they mean to Gaster? Well, they're the only characters in Deltarune whose Undertale equivalents Gaster would be familiar with, other than I suppose Asriel. He would know of their strength. He would know that they possess properties that no one else did. Gaster was potentially given the same task as was Alphys, create soul power to break the barrier. This doesn't necessarily mean create determination. Determination was the particular hypothesis of Alphys. She noted that she could get soul power from monsters, but that monster souls didn't persist after death. That's why she needed determination as a means to an end. However, there is one category of monster souls that do persist after death: boss monsters. You could hypothetically extract soul power from monster souls if you had boss monsters. But Alphys didn't. She wasn't about to kill the king and queen. Now, Gaster on the other hand. Imagine you're Gaster. You've been working on the same problem Alphys has, how to get soul energy. You don't know about determination. You don't even have human souls to experiment on. Your only idea is to somehow get boss monster souls, but Toriel and Asgore have stopped aging. They will live forever. You have absolutely no way to get your hands on a boss monster soul unless you're going to launch a coup. And by then, what's the point? You create your Deltarune interface to connect to another world, potentially as an unrelated project, but then, 2 creatures from that other world manage to break out, manage to make it to your world. You realize now that you have access to more individuals than just exist in the underground, with proper souls, and you come up with a brilliant idea. There are boss monsters in this other world. If you could go and extract those boss monsters, then you could get access to the soul power you so desired. You could potentially even replicate this process infinitely by accessing different worlds, or by resetting the connection. A barbaric practice to those within the world you're plundering. A great breakthrough in the quest for freedom to those outside of it. So Gaster sends Chris and Noel, the Knight, back into Deltarune to get boss monsters. We see, on screen, 2 of these attempts, one successful and one unsuccessful. And it's possible that there is a third we don't see. After all, no one has seen Asriel for a little bit, have they? Gaster sent the Knight to extract them from Deltarune. How did he do this? We now return to entry number 17. Gaster here is clearly describing a dark fountain. If you believe that Chris and Noelle are the ones he is speaking to, then the obvious conclusion is that Chris and Noelle were the ones who opened the Dark Fountain. Where would a Dark Fountain generated in the Undertale universe go? It's an unanswered question. Consider this. What if the fountain that was opened in the true lab was a reverse Dark Fountain? Instead of connecting Hometown to another world, it connected another world to Hometown. This was the method through which Chris and Noelle, the knight, re-entered Deltarune and were able to bring others back out. This is even supported by an odd timeline detail in Deltarune. It's implied that the original Dark Fountain, the Dark Fountain that presumably Des got lost in, was opened by the knight. Specifically the knight, with their weapon and armor and all that. But every single candidate for the knight has their journey towards becoming the knight begin with Des getting lost. Amalgamite is even less feasible at this point in time, unless somehow, when they re-entered Deltarune through the True Lab, they went back in time. In the aftermath of Undertale, Toby has produced a lot of supplementary content related to it, and every chance he gets, he retroactively writes Noelle Holiday into it. Sans talks about Noelle in the console editions of Undertale. Cancelled Undertale alarm clock dialogue mentions Noelle. In the Undertale 10th anniversary livestream, we see Noelle in Snowdin, and she's a little fawn. She's a little girl. Other child characters, including Monster Kid and Asriel, are teenagers or young adults come Deltarune, so it's feasible that Deltarune's versions of these characters are about 10 years older than Undertale's versions of these characters. Or, in other words, chronologically, Undertale may be about 10 years before Deltarune. These timelines aren't running parallel, Undertale is behind. And Gaster exists in Undertale's past, even further back. If you were to leap directly from Gaster's time in Undertale to the equivalent time in Deltarune, it would be years before anything night-related happened. So if you found a way to get from Undertale back to Deltarune, that could be a plausible method of time travel. What if this reverse Dark Fountain was that method? If Noelle and Chris entered Undertale from Deltarune through the lake, and then went back to Deltarune through the reverse fountain, then they could potentially come out before they came in. And the mechanism through which they did this was the shelter. It's not a dark fountain in the conventional sense, explaining why Rousey doesn't seem to know about it, and he's otherwise knowledgeable about all dark worlds. It is a boundary between worlds, just not the light and dark worlds, just as the lake is. It's a rift in time and space. That's why entry number 17 music, muse_smile, plays slowed down by 666% when you're close to it, because it was the product of entry number 17. That explains the time travel. That explains the night. That's their plan. That's Gaster's plan. Extract boss monsters from Deltarune and bring them to his world. That's how Gaster eventually was shattered across time and space, perhaps. Across the two different timelines, across the two different worlds. Maybe he fell into that deep dark chasm below the DT extractor. Given where that chasm is situated, perhaps that's where the fountain connecting both worlds was located. Perhaps, in Chapter 7, we may even play a role in sealing it and sealing Gaster's fate. Did I lose you? I mean, probably at some point, but I sense for many of you, that'll be a different point, and I think that's still interesting. Very, very interesting. But that's Clay Theory. It doesn't explain everything. The true nature of the Deltarune-Undertale dichotomy is very wonky. To what extent does the player play into all this? To what extent are they a component in Gaster's grand design? And the crack parts of Clay Theory are victim to the same follies as Amalgamite Theory itself. For example, not being able to explain the Chris and Knight collaboration, and yet are difficult to explain without it. Des has gotta be involved in here somewhere if she fell into the Shelter Dark World, but I can't seem to find a place for her. Heck, maybe Crack Clay Theory is the only component of this theory that's right, and Des is the Knight who's collaborating with Gaster after she fell into Undertale. Regardless, that's why this structure was laid out like an iceberg. Take what you want from Clay Theory, and leave what you don't. Build your own Clay Theory. Build your own story, your own narrative. It's in your hands now. And sit back with us. Wait for Chapter 6 and 7 with us. Be excited for Chapter 6 and 7 with us. Trust in Toby Fox and his vision with us.